Hello everyone, this is Marc Sabatella from Mastering MuseScore. I would like to welcome you to the MuseScore Café. So for people who aren't familiar, if you're new here, welcome. If you've been here before, welcome back. This is my weekly series where we talk about some aspect of making music using MuseScore. So what usually happens here is I pick some topic to talk about or some theme that's organizing things. And today's topic, we're going to talk about dynamics. And surprised me to see that I've never devoted a whole episode to that before. And there's, a lot of things to talk about with dynamics. So I look forward to diving into it. One thing I want to do before I go further is make sure that I have the chat up on this machine because I neglected to do that, so I can do interesting things like give you the link to my school where I have all my courses and stuff, right? So HTTPS school.masteringmusescore.com. And that's good enough. All right, so that is the link to the my website where I have my course for learning MuseScore, courses for learning theory. You can't hear the music. Okay, that is good to know. And I get to figure out why, because obviously this will not go well. Okay, right here, I see I need to do this. So let's try some music again. Make sure it's working. Let's see. We have music now? All right, everyone, let me know if we have music now. It looks like it's showing up in my mixer here, and so apparently I had set something up wrong or at least lost the setup. That happens periodically, so I will try to keep monitoring this. But someone please let me know in the chat. It's always like, 20 seconds behind what I'm saying, so I'm just going to keep talking until I hear some confirmation. Good. There we go. All right, everyone. And that's always part of the joy of these things. So that website that I posted to the top there, school.masteringmusescore.com, that is what I would consider the main website of mine. So if I go there, school.masteringmusescore.com, you see, since I'm logged in, you see a link for your courses that you're enrolled in, a link to show all courses, a link to subscribe to the newsletter, which I highly recommend. If most of you are probably already on my newsletter list, but it goes out every week, and I have information about what's coming up in these live events, also just other useful information. But then also, if you click where it says community here, that sends you over to the community part of my websites. And the community is where the Music Masterclass now lives. So if you can get to the school, then click where it says community to get to the community. But the community website is community.masteringmusescore.com. So if you don't have a bookmark already, make one, or just remember that that's how you can get here. School.masteringmusescore.com or community.masteringmusescore.com. All right, so the topic again for today is dynamics. So I'm just sort of scrolling through here to see comments, and I always like to see when everyone's checking in, letting us know where you're at. And I'm coming from Denver, for anyone who doesn't know, or just outside Denver. We're going to talk about dynamics, and there's a number of things to talk about with them. Some of them are obvious, some of them less so. So I'm just going to start entering some dynamics. So I'm going to enter, and enter some notes. And then, y'all know that it's going to be that song, right? That's always what I enter. So, so this bit of melody here, we all recognize probably Mary Had a Little Lamb. I'm going to enter dynamic markings. And when you enter dynamic markings or anything from the palette, the usual way we want you to do this is to click the note you want it to apply to, and then click the dynamic you want to apply there. Da 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 dum dum dum. And then if I want this one to be quieter, let's make that be P. And then let's make this one be Mezzo Forte again. And then maybe we'll make this one be Forte. So click the note, then click the dynamic. Now, it does work to drag from the palette, but you have to make sure when you drag, it highlights directly the note you're trying to add it to. You can't just drag it in the vicinity and drop. Nothing will happen, right? And that's true of not just dynamics, but everything on the palette. So if you do choose to use drag and drop, you have to get it right on the note, and then you'll see the cursor changes at that point to a little plus sign, or it's different on every operating system. This is Linux. But you'll see the note highlights in blue, or at least you could if I were zoomed in more. Let's do one more of these. See how the note highlighted in blue when I got there? That's how you know it's okay to drop. So that's some basics of just entering the dynamics. The way you normally do it is click the note, then click the palette symbol. Well, let's listen to this. And so on. So you heard it mezzo forte, you heard it get quieter, you heard it get louder. Was that loud enough to hear, or should I turn up the volume in here? I'm going to just do that for now because it won't hurt. So here's mezzo forte, here's piano, and here's mezzo forte again. Right? So there's a number of things before we get into anything more complicated that I want you to know that apply to dynamics. If I click a dynamic, then over here in the inspector, you'll see a lot of stuff. And if your inspector isn't open already, open it from the view menu, view inspector. It's open by default, but a lot of people don't realize how useful it's going to be, and then they close it. And then later on, we talk about how to do things, and you're wondering, well, how come I don't have an inspector? It would be because you closed it previously. So just reopen it with view inspector. So when you click a dynamic marking, what's in the inspector depends on what you've clicked. If nothing is selected, the inspector is basically empty. But if you select a dynamic marking, then you're going to see stuff. You're going to see some stuff that's just about its position. That applies to all elements. You'll see some stuff that's about the text, the font that's used and so forth. And that applies to all text. And then you'll see some stuff that's specific to dynamics. And that's what I want to focus on here. So some of the things that you'll see is like this thing that says dynamic range, velocity change, change speed, style, placement. These are all things that apply to dynamics. And we're going to see what most of these things do over the course of today. What I'm going to show you here, though, is just the velocity. So MIDI, the MIDI standard for how computer synthesis works, is how how different devices communicate with each other. MuseScore itself is communicating with a separate synthesizer, separate kind of, sort of. It's all part of the same program, but it's like separate parts of the program. So MuseScore is communicating with the synthesizer via MIDI. MIDI has this idea of representing how loud or soft a note is by what they call velocity. And it's called velocity because this all dates from actual physical keyboards and having ways of having computers and keyboards talk to each other, or keyboards talk to each other. And velocity is literally how fast you hit that key. You think of it as how hard you're hitting it. But what it really is how fast that key goes down. It's actually measuring how long does it take from when the key starts going down to when it hits the bottom. That is what a synthesizer keyboard is measuring, and depending on how fast that was, that tells it how loud to play. And the scale is 1 to 127. 0 means nothing. Yeah, so I guess the scale is 0 to 127. 0 means no volume at all. It really turns a note off. So, but if you want to actually hear any sound, the scale is 1 to 127. So you can see that 80 is, it's in towards the middle of the range, but a little on the upper side of it. If I enter a mezzo piano, you'll see 64. Well, that's actually exactly the middle. 64 is half of 128. So if the scale goes 0 to 127, then 64 is basically the midpoint. So that 64 value there for mezzo piano is kind of the middle of the volume range. Mezzo forte is a little louder than that, and that's how I think most musicians would interpret things. Mezzo forte is thought of as a middle volume, but it's probably closer to forte than mezzo piano. Well, definitely is than mezzo piano is. Anyhow, an average volume level is medium loud. But you can customize this. If you listen to this and say you didn't think there was enough difference between this mezzo forte and the forte, like maybe you thought there's not enough difference. And the reason you think there's not enough difference is maybe you think the mezzo forte is too loud. Well, fine, make it less. Just go click in that velocity field and turn it down some. I'll turn it down to 72 this time. There's piano, mezzo forte, and forte. Now that's a little clearer. So now I have my mezzo forte at 72. And maybe you like that better. It's totally up to you. You can make your pianos louder, and it's going to totally depend on what sound font you're using, what instrument you're using. Some instruments, the way that the dynamics are assigned to velocities you might like, and some you might not like as much. So this is where you customize all that in the inspector. And when I made that change for this mezzo forte, it affected that mezzo forte, but not the other mezzo forte. It's still at 80. If you've decided that permanently for all time, or at least for a long period of time, you want your mezzo fortes to be at 72 instead of 80, well, what you can do is add it to your palette. And I'm going to go ahead and create another version of my Café palette. I was messing around so much last time when I was talking about custom palettes a couple weeks ago, or customizations in general, that I ended up with a palette that I just ended up having to delete. So I'm going to recreate my Café palette and tell it that, I'm going to let it have customization of toolbars and preferences and which windows are open. And that's going to be all part of my Café workspace. So now that I'm in my Café workspace, I can customize it all I want without messing up my other workspaces. So what I'm going to do is take that 72 mezzo forte, and now I'm going to hold Control and Shift and drag this thing into the palette. Now I have another mezzo forte down here. And this is my 72 velocity mezzo forte. And I put it down here at the end so that I would know, it's the special one. I could put it right next to the other mezzo forte. I could put it actually in between the mezzo piano and the mezzo forte so that I remember it's in between there in volume. If I want to know a little bit more, notice that when I hover over it, the other ones all have their names, P, MP in that yellow highlighting. This one just says dynamic. Well, if I right click it and go to properties, I can say Mezzo Forte 72. And now when I'm not even right clicking, just hovering. So when I hover over the MF, now it says MF 72. And so now I'll remember that is my a little quieter version of MF. So that's how you can customize the playback of your dynamic markings. Now, the rest of the settings in here all have to do with what happens if there's more than just that dynamic marking, if there's multiple voices, multiple staves, etc. So I'm going to go ahead and add some more stuff. I'm going to add another staff to my piano. So now I have a whole grand staff. And then I'm going to add a flute, and I'll add a bassoon. So if I add notes here now in the left hand for the piano, I'll go. All right, so now when I play this, you're going to hear that these dynamic markings affect both staves. Right, so they affected both staves. I guess I should finish my piece here. I lost my selection. All right, so loud, mezzo piano. There we go. So the dynamic is affecting both staves together. Now, we know as pianists, well, I'm a pianist, I know, and other pianists probably realize this, and maybe people who aren't pianists realize this. When you're playing the piano, if you're playing the melody as part of what you're doing, you're playing solo piano, as opposed to, say, playing in an ensemble where you're not necessarily the melody. If you are playing the melody, you will usually bring those notes out a little louder. And you do that without actually having separate dynamic markings. In other words, when you look at actual published piano music, you will not see it say MF for the right hand, MP for the left hand. That is not a thing. That is not, we can do that. You can have different dynamic markings for the hands, but people don't do it just for that sort of ordinary, I want the melody a little louder thing. Instead, pianists are just supposed to know that. Well, MuseScore doesn't know that. So if I wanted to get the right hand to be a little louder, I wouldn't actually use dynamic markings for it. What I'm going to do is just select those notes. So I'll click the first measure, shift click the last measure here, and then notice the inspector is now almost empty. That's because I don't only have notes selected. I have notes and dynamic markings and the note head and the stem. It's not smart enough to realize you probably only want to work on the notes. For MuseScore 4, that will be improved. But so far, that's not the case. But in the inspector, at the bottom of the inspector here, you'll see this button that says Notes. Well, click that. And now it's just the notes that are selected. And when the notes are selected, the inspector again has just the general stuff about offset, but then it's got stuff that's specific to notes. And what I'm going to do is go down towards the end here where you're going to see, again, velocity settings. So we saw that the dynamics had a velocity setting, but now we're going to look at the velocity setting for the note. And notice it says 0. Well, that doesn't mean this note is 0 velocity. It means the offset. See this drop down here where it says offset? It means it's 0 different from the dynamic marking. In other words, it says whatever the dynamic marking says, that holds. If you want it to be a little louder than what the dynamic marking says, this is where you would change that. So if I want it to be, say, 20 points louder, I can put a 20 in under velocity here, and that will make the right hand 20 points louder on that scale of 0 to 127. That's pretty harsh there, right? And the reason it's harsh there is that forte is already set to velocity 96. So adding 20 to that puts it at 117, 116. We're now almost as loud as you can get. Well, that's probably too harsh. So maybe I select just those notes. So I'll select that measure and then the notes here and tell it, well, don't go 20 louder, maybe only go 10 louder for that passage. Or I could select the left hand and its notes and make them 10 points softer by making it -10. So now I'll hear something a little less harsh, but still louder in the right hand. Let's hear what we got now. Good. The musician in me really liked that 1-6-2-5 there, but it didn't like the one. I'm talking about chord progressions here. 1-6-2-5. But I didn't like that. This was just a doubled D here. So the musician theory person in me wants this to be an F instead. I'm just trying to make it more interesting. There we go. Yeah. Did I want it to be an F sharp? Yeah, either way, right? So this is all stuff that comes from my harmony thing. So hopefully a bunch of you were at I know some of you were at my harmony, the how to create a great chord progression workshop last week. If not, check it out. Let me post the link in here. Actually, the best way to get to it is from right here. So I'm going to select this and post it into the chat just so you can get it. So if anyone didn't check it out, do so. And so, yeah, also my office hours are on Tuesday, and a couple of people have mentioned that today, and I just wanted to mention, yeah, that is a thing that I do on, it's right now being done on Zoom, so it's an actual call where we can interact and all, and it's this great thing that I offer for people who sign up for the All Access membership. So if you click the link up at the top there and check out on my website, you'll see the All Access membership, and that's that gets you into the the office hours that I do same time on Tuesdays, and then it can be a more interactive discussion. So, good. And I see Trevor saying that he didn't know about the thing that I'm doing. I assume you're talking about the velocity business. So great. Glad to know that this has already been helpful here. Meanwhile, I'm going to keep going. So first of all, I raised the volume level of the melody rather than lowering the accompaniment, except in that one spot where I did a little of each. That's all subjective. You decide how to do that. The reason I did the raising of the melody is in this particular piece, it would have been equally easy because there's just one melody line and one accompaniment line. But what if there were multiple voices going on and whole chords and all? There's only one melody note, but there's a lot of non-melody notes. And it's usually easier to select the melody notes than everything except the melody notes. So I'm just sort of in the habit of doing that when I'm trying to make this effect. I'll select the melody because it's maybe a little easier than selecting everything else. But yeah, finding a way to do that, that's like a whole other subject. So whatever works for you. Whatever works for you is fine. So I've now done that thing where I brought out the melody a little bit there. But there's another thing I could do. What if I wanted to move the melody to the left hand for a little bit? What if I actually wanted to do that and made the left hand have and then had the right hand just have the accompaniment. So now, and then I'm going to even select, actually now that I've entered new notes, I think those velocity changes, oh, they're still there. So I'm going to reset those velocity changes I made there because I don't want those notes to be louder anymore, right? I don't want those notes louder. So I'm just making sure they're louder by changing it from 0 to something else and then back to 0. So now they'll be the same volume. Now, in this case, if a pianist saw this, they would have to think a little bit. They would have to think a little about what to actually do here. The fact that the melody has moved to the left hand, I think they would figure it out and play it a little louder, but maybe this is a case where it does pay to actually put a separate dynamic marking on the left hand. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to select the left hand note and add a Mezzo Forte. I'll just make it be Mezzo Piano. So let's hear this now. Now, I added the Mezzo Piano there, but it didn't really do it. In fact, let me delete it and just make it be an actual forte so we can tell it didn't do it. Right? It did not play a forte there. The reason it didn't play a forte is normally dynamics apply to both staves. That's how piano music works, and that's why you only have to add it to the top staff, and it affects them both. If you try putting a dynamic on both staves, they're going to fight it out because they both want to apply to both staves, and it can't happen. So one of them is going to win and one of them is going to lose. And the winner is going to be, I think, whichever one you entered first, or maybe whichever on the top staff. I don't even know what the winner is. I don't want to depend on who's going to win that battle. What I want to do is tell MuseScore, yes, I want this piano to only be the top staff, and I want that forte to only be the bottom staff. So I'm going to come back to the inspector here. I've selected the piano on the top staff, and now where it says dynamic range, I'm going to set that to staff instead of part. Part means the piano part. So not the flute, not the bassoon, which I haven't used yet, but we're going to see those in a moment. So by setting it to part, that piano, part is the default. I want to change it from part to staff. By setting it to staff, that says that piano only applies to the top staff. And then I'll do the same for the forte. Make sure it applies only to its staff. Now I'm going to hear piano on top, forte on the bottom. Here we go. Yeah. Now that was maybe a little extreme then. So if I go back to what I really intended of the Mezzo Forte, maybe, that's probably going to be a little more to the point. So there you have it. So by adding dynamics to the staves of the piano part separately, you want to set their dynamic range to staff. Well, the third setting in there for system happens, well, what if there's other instruments? If I have a flute part and the flute part is going, I'll just give it an extra little obligato. An octave higher because it's a flute and it can play higher. I gotta make it be musical if I can. So when I write this now, what you can see is that the flute never changed its dynamic. By the way, the default is kind of a Mezzo Forte, but I wouldn't depend on that either. You don't know. If you give this to a person to play, they're going to have to guess. And yeah, they'll probably guess somewhere around a Mezzo Forte, but don't make them guess. Since it's not the melody, I do often, in writing arrangements, deliberately give whoever has the melody one dynamic louder than everyone else. On piano, you don't have to do that. The pianist knows which note is the melody. Probably. They can figure it out. And only where it's not obvious would you do something like writing in these multiple dynamics. But if you're writing for an ensemble, the people in the ensemble don't know who has the melody. If you don't know that your part's the melody, so you don't know to play your part a little louder unless you've played the arrangement before and have figured it out. So I do often write the whoever has the melody one dynamic louder than everyone else. And hello, Anon. I saw that you tried to join office hours. Just want to point out that it's Tuesdays, the same time as this. So it's 12:30 Eastern is when my office hours are on Tuesday. Just would emphasize that also again for anyone who wants to join as an all-access member. Highly recommend you get access to all my courses, but also the office hours, which are kind of turning into a pretty cool discussion. We have a lot of people coming in and we share music together and talk about things. It's like a more in-depth version of the things that's possible in the masterclass. Okay, so in any case, now the flute's going to be mezzo piano all the way through. My photo is frozen. Is it just my photo that's frozen or is it everything else? Let me know. Because if it's just my photo, I ain't going to worry. Oh, look at that. It disappeared. Now that is so weird. Huh. I didn't even know that's a thing. Hello. That's strange. That is strange, but I guess I'm not going to worry about it. I mean, what the heck? Yeah. Webcam. It's, I don't know what's up with that. No idea what's up with that. So, I think I'm not going to mess with it because if everything else is okay, I'm just going to say you don't need to see me. You know, it's fun, but I don't know what happened to my webcam, to be honest. The light's still on as if it were working. It's just not actually working. So, oh, looks like I'm sleeping. Let's do this. I'll do the update stream and then it'll just disappear. So, because I'd probably rather have nothing than have my eyes closed. All right. In any case, hopefully everything is still okay, and just let me know. So the flute is mezzo piano here, but maybe I wanted it to get quieter, but it didn't get quieter when just because I entered, just because, and the flute's not going to get louder if I put in more notes down here. The flute is not going to get louder just because the piano got louder, right? The flute is going to stay the same volume. If I want the flute to get louder also, I need to give it its own I need to give it its own dynamic marking. So if I want this to be forte also, then I need to add a forte. And yes, Joanne, anytime I go to mess with my settings, you're going to see the software where my settings are, and it's going to have the picture in a picture thing. So, oh, the music's gone? Or is it still gone, or was it only gone while I was messing with settings? Because that's normal. No, the music's here. I see the music here, so everything's fine. Yeah, while I'm messing with settings, just expect that you're going to see the picture within a picture and the music's not there. That's normal. So while I'm trying to fix things, just expect to see strange things. Okay, so what am I talking about? So the flute is not actually forte here, and it actually sounds kind of loud, but it's not that loud. If I change this from an F to a pianissimo, you'll see the flute is still louder. Right? So the pianissimo doesn't affect all instruments, just the part. Now, if you wanted it to affect all instruments, you can do that by taking that dynamic and instead of setting it to part, set it to system. Now it affects the entire system. So, welcome, Fretless Spaceman, Michael, and we've been talking about dynamics. So you'll just you probably already know most of the stuff that we're talking about, but you can go back and watch. But we'll just I'm going to move on to talking about hairpins in a moment. But right now I'm talking about getting this pianissimo to affect the flute also. So now it does. Now that's not normal, right? In a score, it's expected that you put a dynamic marking on every staff, or every part anyhow, because they might be different. They might change at different times, and eventually when you generate parts from your score, the musicians are going to need to see. It's not going to do the flute player any good to look at a dynamic marking on the piano part. They need their own dynamic markings. So it's totally normal in a score that the dynamic is on every staff. But yeah, there can be some unusual special cases where, for whatever reason, to save some space in the score, you just enter the dynamic marking once and trust that the conductor knows that it's on all the parts. And then you'd have to actually add it to all the parts and make it invisible. I don't recommend doing this, but I'm at least showing you I'm showing you that it's possible to do that. And yeah, I do wish I could fix the thing. Actually, I'm going to try one more time. So I'm going to come back here. I'm going to delete the webcam. And I'm just going to add a new one. So, add a new webcam. Yeah, front camera. It's just not showing. Just not going to happen. Deleted my screen share. Dang it. Sorry about that, guys. I shouldn't have changed this. I shouldn't have messed with it. Shouldn't have touched it. Let's come back out of here. Go back to my screen share. Select screen share. Okay. Get all this working again. Delete that audio. This audio should be good. All right. So hopefully we're good again, and just no picture. It's just the way it is. So I'm going to make sure you can hear my audio. All right, so hopefully the audio is there. Um, all right, so yeah, not sure what's up with my webcam, but I'm not going to worry about it because that's not important. These are some of the things that you can do with the dynamic markings themselves. In the newsletter, I talked about adding text, and yeah, that's a thing too. Like if I want to point out that this pianissimo should be subito pianissimo, I double click it to edit it, and then it's just plain text. So then I can type subito, and it shows italic. No audio? Dang it. All right. Gonna be one of those days. Nah, losing audio is bad for business here today, right? So I'm gonna try again to add my screen share. Screen share, share audio, share, hit update stream. And let's try again. Audio now, yes or no? But right now I'm talking about the text, so I'm not going to worry about it. But I guess I will find out in a moment if it works. You all can let me know. But so I just added that text, right? Let me undo that change. So what I did, yes, it's working. I can hear that now. Okay, good. So I double click this dynamic marking to edit it, and then like any other text, I just move my cursor to the beginning of it or the end of it and type subito, and it knows to be italic. However, it's centered over the note, right? I don't want that. I want it left aligned with the note. So I'm going to use the inspector to left align it. And now it's left aligned with the stem. And that's probably good. I mean, I guess I could try to make it so that it's like, I don't know, offset a little to the left or something. Or I could put the word subito after the pianissimo. I'm going to do that. I'm going to take the subito and put it after subito, so that the pianissimo is aligned with the E. But notice that dynamics are normally centered, and this isn't centered, it's left aligned. So I want to center the pianissimo but not the subito part. So I'm just going to move it manually. I'm going to use Control left arrow to move it a staff space. Maybe two? Just one. So that's how I would do that. All right. So good. So yeah, we have sound. Everything's good other than not having my webcam working for some strange reason. Still no idea why that's the case, but I ain't going to worry about it. So the next thing then to talk about here before I actually talk about hairpins is single note dynamics. And so this does not apply to piano. A piano, you can't hit a note and then crescendo it. It doesn't work that way, right? But flutes can. So I'm going to go ahead and add a flute note, a 7G, right? So 7 for whole note G. And I'm going to enter a crescendo there. And now let's listen to what happens when I play it back. Nothing. And you might wonder, well, why didn't that work? Well, it didn't work because we didn't give MuseScore enough information. We didn't tell it, it knows to start with where it left off. It left off with whatever the last thing it said it saw was, which was mezzo piano. But we didn't tell it how loud to get. So let's be more specific. I'm going to select the G and say mezzo piano, and then I'm going to select whatever the next note is and put in a forte on it. So now it will hopefully work. Now that didn't sound very mezzo piano to me, did it? Did that sound mezzo piano to you? I feel like that didn't do what I expected. Let's make it pianissimo. See if that's any better. Yeah, it's just louder than I think it's going to be. I think it's because my headphones are turned up a little louder than they usually are. But let me make it even more extreme. P, triple P. So one of the reasons also, though, let me go back to what it was before. I'm going to go back to just the single P, and I thought maybe it sounded a little too loud. I think what's really happening is it got too loud too fast. So I'm going to select this hairpin here, the crescendo, and then come over to the inspector. And there's these different settings here. Now it says dynamic range, which works the same way as for dynamics. Velocity change. Velocity change is so that I could explicitly say, I want you to get 50 points louder in velocity, rather than just using the dynamic markings. If you've entered dynamic markings, there's no reason to put a number here. If you want to get away without using dynamic markings, like I'll do that in a second. Let me actually just do that first. If I come over here and enter a G and put a crescendo mark on it, and I only put the piano at the beginning of it, nothing happens. But if I tell the crescendo marking over here a velocity change of 60, now we'll hear it. Right? It got louder. And that's because I told MuseScore, using this velocity change in the inspector, how much louder to get. So that's all good. But in this one here, it's because I put in the piano and the forte that it knew to get louder. Because I put in the dynamics, I didn't have to enter a number. That's the normal thing. Normally, you would want to put a dynamic at the end of your crescendo, and do it by adding it to the next note or next rest or whatever, and then you can position it if you need it positioned differently. But as it is, it got too loud too fast for me. So I want to come over here in the inspector where it says dynamics method and it says default linear. I don't actually know what these words mean. Ease in and out, ease in. I think ease in means don't get loud so fast, but then start getting louder faster steadily. I think that's probably the one I want, but let's hear it. Yeah, that's fine. But you could just play with those different settings because they all do something slightly different. Here's ease in and out. I think that reached maximum volume a little earlier. And then there's one that says exponential, which I think is kind of a more extreme version of that same thing. Let's hear exponential. And that waited until the very end and kind of did a little of that business. Anyhow, you can play with those settings, and it affects how quickly that crescendo happens. Now, let me come back to this one over here. It's gotten louder because I did the thing in the inspector, but I didn't tell the human musician how much louder to get. So someone actually reading this is not going to know what to do. So in cases like this where there's not a following note, like here, I wanted to put the forte on the next note, and I did that, and MuseScore did the right thing. Here, there is no following note, and if I put a forte on the rest, that just looks kind of funny, because how do you play a rest forte? I think people would figure out what you meant, but it's don't do it that way. That's not the right way to do it. Instead, what I'm going to recommend is you select the hairpin here, and then you can actually add a dynamic marking to the hairpin. So I come over here, and I think it works just to click the forte. It does. And that adds a forte as text, that hairpin. It has no effect whatsoever. If I hadn't done that velocity change thing, it would do nothing. So in fact, let me undo that velocity change. I'll reset the velocity change. We're not going to hear a crescendo here. But at least musicians will see this and see, oh, I know what to do. Then you can go back to the inspector and set your velocity change. This time I'll only make it 50. It sounded kind of extreme before. There we go. So the combination of adding a text to the end of the hairpin as well as playing with the velocity change in the hairpin itself, those are the combination of things you want to deal with. if people have other things that you've been wondering about with dynamics, let me know. But there's one other thing that's really kind of unfortunate about this whole single note dynamics business, and that MIDI was not designed for that. MIDI was designed like in the mid 80s, and it was designed for keyboard instruments, and the idea that you might hit a note and then have it get louder after hitting it was just not a thing. It wasn't something that people really thought hard about. So it was sort of grafted on a bit later, and there's multiple ways of doing it, and there's not really good standards for how this works. So as a result, the sound fonts that exist that MuseScore can use don't all agree on how to actually achieve this. The bottom line here is if I want to change this flute in the mixer to something else, I'm going to open the mixer by pressing F10, and I will really open the mixer by pressing F10 this time. You saw that I said F10, it just didn't open because I think the keyboard focus had wandered elsewhere. If I select the flute, let me make the mixer just a tad bigger. I'm going to select the flute channel, and notice the sound says flute expert. You want to get in the habit of paying attention to that word expert. That's not a word, it's an abbreviation for expressive. Basically, that means is able to respond to single note dynamics. Expert's a lot shorter. Why didn't just say SND? Because we use the abbreviation SND for single note dynamics elsewhere. But in any case, expert is what it says. So if you want to change that to a different sound, notice all these other instruments here. Like if I want to change it to a pan flute, don't change it to just plain pan flute. If you change it to plain pan flute and come over here, you don't get the crescendo. We're not going to get the crescendo here. Right? But if I go back to that mixer and instead of pan flute, pick pan flute expert, now I get the crescendo. Right? So you need the expert version of things in order to get that crescendo to work. So you might wonder, well, why don't we just make everything expert? Well, the problem is if I set the piano, if instruments that aren't capable of using single note dynamics can't use these expert versions of sounds. It's because that whole business with velocity, single note dynamics doesn't work with velocity. Velocity is something you set the moment you hit the key or start the note in MuseScore. There is no way to change the velocity of a note after you hit it. So instruments have to either use velocity or they use this other fancy thing called a continuous controller, and that's what allows the crescendos to happen. So instruments have to know up front, am I going to use velocity to control volume like piano does, or am I going to use these continuous controllers to control volume like flutes do? So piano doesn't have single note dynamics enabled, so using an expert sound for piano will not produce good effects. If I go to the mixer and try to put in, boy, it's just really finicky sometimes. If I select the piano and then choose a sound that's an expert sound, like one of the organ sounds, that's actually, I'll use a rock organ expert. I think what we're going to find is there's no dynamics at all. Right? I could put a forte in here, and we're not going to hear any dynamics. That is because the organ sound is waiting for these continuous controller messages to come, but the piano is not sending them because the piano says, I don't do that. I only do velocity. It's all or nothing. Now, the way you should have done that is not by changing the sound in the mixer. The way you should have done that is by right-clicking the piano and then saying Staff Part Properties and actually changing the instrument from piano to organ. If I do that, notice here in staff part properties, there's this checkbox that controls single note dynamics. When I actually change from piano to organ, it's not going to be a rock organ anymore. Now that checkbox is checked. In fact, if I cancel out of this dialog, that's all I really need to do is check that box. But you shouldn't be using the mixer to change instruments. You should be using change instrument, because then it knows everything that needs to change. It needs to change the mixer settings, the staff name, the default clefs, the transposition. Change instrument is how you would normally change instruments. But if I come in here while it's still piano and just turn on use single note dynamics, I think it's going to work. Yeah. So that single note dynamics checkbox in the staff properties is what kind of controls whether you need to use the expert or the non-expert versions of a sound. Normally you don't mess with that. When you add an instrument, MuseScore knows to set it up either single note dynamics or not, and then to use either an expert sound or not. It's only if you change sounds in the mixer that you have to worry about this. So the rule is, when you open the mixer, if you want to change that bassoon sound to something else, notice if it's expert or not now. If it's expert now, only change it to something else that's expert. So you can change it to tenor sax expert, not to tenor sax. If you need to change it to something that doesn't have an expert version, like you're changing it to nylon string guitar, that doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to use a nylon string playback sound for a bassoon. You should be changing the instrument to nylon string guitar, and then it will do all the right things. But if you need to, for whatever reason, do that, just make sure the single note dynamics checkbox goes with the expert. If single note dynamics is checked, use expert. If single note dynamics is not checked, don't use expert. And that's MuseScore's default sound font. If you're using a non-default sound font, you're kind of on your own, because, as I said, standards don't really exist for this. Most third-party sound fonts won't work out of the box with the MuseScore way of handling all this. For people who do use not third-party sound fonts, I will say, if you go to View, Synthesizer Dynamics, you will see there are these different settings here to control whether velocity or CC, continuous controller messages, are used, and then you get to select which continuous controller, because there are different ones numbered differently, and there's all these different buttons to press. So if you're using non-default sound fonts, you might have to experiment with these. You might have to ask on the support forum, hey, does anyone know the right settings to use for such and such a sound font? I'm told that CC11 works for a lot of sound fonts. That's what I'm told, but I can't really verify that because I just don't experiment with other sound fonts enough. So I've showed you things that I want to show you about the single note about dynamics in general. I should also point out that when you look at the MuseScore Café, you'll see that I use a lot of these things. I've got this crescendo here, right? That thing that gets louder there. I believe in here I have forte pianos. So let's just see one of those in action. And this I just added to forte piano here. And when I hear this, listen to the horns. So it hits the note loud, then immediately gets soft. If that didn't get soft enough for your taste, that's fine. Come over here to the inspector. So I've selected that forte piano dynamic. Its velocity is 96, meaning the initial hit is 96, but then it's going to drop down 63. That's the velocity change. And if that's not enough for me, let's make it go down more. Let's go make it go down to 80. And let's do the same thing for the other instruments that do that. 80. Oh, I could have selected all three of them at once and done that, by the way. I could have selected all three together with Control click. So now it's going to be a more extreme forte piano. So, the forte pianos do that. They will hit the loud and then immediately get quiet. And there was even a setting in there for the change speed. So this time I'm going to select all three of them together. So I'm control clicking them. And where it says change speed, instead of normal, I'm going to say fast. And that's going to cause the drop down to be more immediate. It didn't really sound that different to me. But in any case, that's the theory there. Let me try the slow version just to see what the slow version does. Control click, and go in here and change speed slow. See what that one does. Yeah, that definitely held the forte louder before it got to quiet. Anyhow, I just leave that at the default. I didn't mess with it. So, I talked about a bunch of things all relating to dynamics, and yeah, I did. Somehow I hadn't really talked about all of these things the same day before, so I'm happy to have gotten to talk about it. And again, thanks everyone for being here. And let me start my music here and talk a little bit. So, thanks everyone for being here for today's cafe, despite all the little glitches, but nothing earth-shatteringly terrible. Just lost my picture, lost sound temporarily, but that's all. So tomorrow is the music masterclass, and again, that's what I do every Thursday, same time, where we actually talk about the composition process, the arranging process. And I posted a link earlier to where my workshop was, where I talked about how to create a great chord progression. And this month, that's what we're going to be focusing on, is chord progressions. And so anyone who posts any music to my community site, do that, so I can have some music to be talking about here in the masterclass. I will give my feedback on your music. That's the point of the masterclass. And we're going to be talking about harmony. So I really look forward to doing that. But in order to do this, you need to go to the community site. So I'm going to type that into here. It's community.masteringmusescore.com. And when you go there at this time, you don't even have to go to any particular page on that site. Anywhere on that site, when the right time rolls around, a notification pops up, and then all you got to do is click the notification, and you will be attending the masterclass. But yes, the masterclass is now in the community rather than on YouTube. So it's a really nice thing, because I can then, as I'm giving individual feedback on their pieces, I can bring them on board and have them converse with me in real time rather than just using the chat. So to go to the community site, you just go there and so actually let me just walk through that for a second, because this is new for some people. So if you haven't seen this before, so here's the community site here. I'm just refreshing the screen. So this is the community site, and then what you'll want to do is see where it says Music Masterclass. Here under Share and Discuss is where you're going to want to go. And yeah, nice to see some new people finding out about Mastering MuseScore randomly. That's always great. So if you click where it says under Music Masterclass, Share and Discuss, that's where you would post your music, and then just new post and post your music. The way you will actually post it, what I recommend is to upload it to MuseScore.com first and then post a link. That's the easiest for people. And I even have a pinned thing off to the side here that says, I have to refresh the screen. Every once in a while things don't work right and you have to refresh the screen on this site. You'll see a pinned post up at the top, how to share your music. That gives you more information on how to do that. But yeah, I recommend that you upload it to MuseScore.com, and then when you create your new post, paste the link into that post. You can actually attach into a posting here, but if you attach it, then other people have to download it first. It's a lot easier for just people to listen to people's music online. So I definitely recommend that. So you go to new post and say, hi there, here's my music, and then type maybe some more stuff about it, and then you would paste in the link. And the link is going to be, whatever, MuseScore.com, whatever it actually is. Or you could just hit the paperclip to actually attach something if you want to do it that way. But again, more people will check out your music if you paste the link, because then they don't have to download it and open it in MuseScore. Then they can just click the link and view it on MuseScore.com. Definitely makes it more likely that I'll check it out faster. So, in any case, again, everyone, thanks for being here. And yeah, join me tomorrow for the masterclass, and we'll be talking about making music. So thanks, everyone, and I will see you next time.